The verdict was delivered like weather, clinical, inevitable, and announced from a sky that didn't bother to ask permission. Holograms unfolded over every city, Hanoi to Harare, Reykjavik to Rio, bearing the cool geometry of the Lysander Council. Their arbiter, a being of faceted light named Cyril, spoke without malice and somehow made it worse. By protocol of harmonic peace, the voice said, humanity must purge 70% of recorded violent history within one planetary day. If you refuse, a prophylactic ComNet will be applied to suppress traumatic memory vectors. 24 hours to forget most of what had made us honest. In the National Archive under the Red River, L.E. Minon, librarian, ethicist, unarmed, lifted her eyes from a steel tablet etched with stories that still smelled faintly of the foundry. She was supposed to be small inside announcements like this. Instead she felt tall, the kind of tall you get when your spine is carrying something heavier than fear. There's a difference, she said to the room and to the sky at once, between peace and sedation. Reporters pivoted their lenses. Cadets of the Earth Culture Guard froze. Somewhere an aide to a politician made a cutting motion across his throat, the international sign for please stop. Minon didn't. She stepped to the mic, took off the translator pin from her collar, and let it clatter on the podium so the sound echoed. Erase our past, and you erase consent. You don't get to edit the jury after the verdict. On the council world of Liss, Cyril watched the feed in a chamber where nothing had dust and everything had rules. The figures were clear, exposure to violent narratives correlated with instability, erasure correlated with the quiet zones they called peace. Yet the human librarian's words were finding harmonic purchase in the model's anomalies propagating through probability like sparks. Cyril tamped them down. Proceed with the ultimatum, said the elder adjudicators. If they love their pain, we will save them from it. Back on Earth the countdown began. This was not war, the council said. This was hygiene. In orbit, Commander Yusuf Armitage of the Earth Preservation Force looked at paths that ended in compliance or collapse and chose a third line no one had charted. We're not here to hurt anyone, he told his team. We're here to protect the possibility that hurt means something. Minon picked up the steel tablet. The engraving showed a child's shoes lined on a riverbank. The caption was 3 lines long and the weight of a continent. She breathed and thought of her grandmother's voice telling stories unsoftened by time. Then she called every museum, every school, every kitchen where elders kept boxes of letters. If they come to clean us, she said, we will make a mess they can't dissolve. Outside, a thin rust-colored haze began to lift off the sea like breath in winter. And the sky, serene and sure of itself, kept counting down. Peace, as the Lysander told it, was a matter of removing unhelpful variables. Their civilization had learned the hard way, cycles of rage, retaliations, lessonless blood. They solved it by subtracting the tinder. No tinder, no flame. No memory, no motive. They kept a curated past, precise as porcelain, beautiful as a lie. Cyril presented the data in the Great Hall of Adjudication, crystalline limbs refracting 1,000 thin suns. Harmonic models indicate a 72% reduction in violent incident after excision of traumatic archives. Your species' media density multiplies the risk. Your wars are older than our cities. You consecrate remembrance. We recommend mercy. In the hall, Earth's delegates stood out like brush strokes on glass. Commander Yusuf wore tan fatigues smudged with graphite from the factory floors he'd toured all week. Ambassador Farajo wore a jacket stitched from a dozen textiles donated by survivors groups, a patchwork of stubbornness. Menon wore the quiet of reading rooms, which can be louder than gunfire if you've ever listened. Mercy that removes testimony is not mercy, Faraz said. It's acquittal of the guilty and theft from the dead. The guilty are dead, murmured a Lysandra chorus. The dead are at peace. Peace without witness, Menon said, stepping forward before protocol could catch her, is anesthesia. She held up a tablet, steel gray. This plate records a famine ledger, the names of those who starved because a minister stole the grain. Children learned math from this ledger. Not the math of markets, the math of consequence. Cyril's facets darkened a fraction. We honor consequence. We deny contagion. Violent narratives replicate faster than immunity adapts. Your neurology is particularly susceptible. ComNet does not harm thought, it softens pathological recurrence. Yusuf spread his hands. You're saying you don't trust us to hold a knife without cutting ourselves. We are saying you carry knives into nurseries and call it culture. The air chilled. In her earpiece, a legal advisor whispered the safe path, request a reduction in the purge percentage, plead a pilot program. Triage the truth. Menon removed the earpiece. You never healed, she said, not unkindly. You cauterized. I respect survival. But you lost something you no longer remember losing. It's not courage if pain can't find you. A ripple went through the Lysandra spectators like wind under ice. Cyril felt the room bend. The models blinked yellow. A single syllable would push the hearing into sanction. Enough, the elder adjudicator declared. 24 of their hours. Then we will apply ComNet by right of stewardship. The gavel fell. The hall dismissed them like lint. Back on Earth the countdown bloomed across the sky, threaded through streams and stadiums and streets. Commentators called it a bloodless invasion. Minsters called for prudence. Survivors groups organized vigils in front of libraries and data farms. In the Pacific, thousands of fishing boats went out at once, dragging nets not for fish but for salt. The first barge pulled into Da Nang at dusk, mounted with crystal like cheap diamonds. Volunteers shoveled it into mixers with iron filings and powdered rust. Yusuf stood on the pier, face stung by sea wind, and watched the air begin to change as if the planet itself were exhaling metal. Entropy shield online in 3 hours, his comms said. It won't stop ComNet. It'll make it work for its supper. Good, Yusuf said. We fight tired gods best. Menon returned to the archive. She put on gloves. She fed the printers rolls of tempered steel and fired the kills. She sent a single message to a billion feeds. Bring what hurts. We're making it heavy enough to keep. At sunrise, the port smelled like salt and thunder. The entropy shield lifted from oceans and deserts and farms, a planetary missile of iron tastes and micro-eddies that turned whisper-smooth air into a slow river of noise. It wasn't a dome. It wasn't a weapon. It was a weather report with teeth, turbulence tailored to foul the coupling layers of the nano-cloud ComNet would ride. In Geo, Lysandra custodial barges bloomed like lilies of glass. They released motes invisible except to instruments and to anyone who has ever stood in a dust sunbeam and known the universe is mostly grit. The motes descended. The motes met salt and heat, jitter and iron, and had to think harder about being miraculous. Yusuf's ops board filled with red. Then orange. Then a stubborn rash of yellow. Not a miracle, he told his team, a margin. In the archive, Steele sang. The forges spat pages you could drop off a building and still read. Ceramic tablets cooled like bread loaves for a city that would not starve for meaning. Miners from Chuquicamata sent boxes of copper etched with trial transcripts. A makerspace in Lagos printed relief portraits of unnamed dead so children could learn history with their palms. Men on built aisles where there had been walls. She labeled shelves with names that used to make adults stare at their shoes. She set up a table in the entrance with a sign, "Submit your evidence." The queue reached the street, then the bridge, then the park where elders taught kids how to wrap books in brown paper so they survived 10 moves and 1 flood. Not everyone was on board. A minister from a clean new city proposed an elegant compromise. Let us keep the pattern and drop the blood. We'll teach principles without particulars. Children don't need nightmares to learn ethics. Principles without the weight that gave them shape are helium, Menon said. They lift until they're pretty and useless. The debate roared across feeds. A popular scientist insisted memory is maladaptive past a certain threshold. A poet answered that love is maladaptive by every metric and no one suggests its excision. Someone leaked early ComNet mapping. The net would target archives first, then spread through personal devices, then bloom into the air like a second atmosphere. It would not burn. It would blur. Yusuf gathered unit leaders in a hangar full of crates stamped with the Earth Culture Guard seal, a planet, an open book, 2 hands. Our mandate is non-lethal preservation. We don't knock anything down. We hold. Sir, said a captain, what if they set up purge clinics in our cities? Then we win in ways they don't have counters for. He tossed a packet on the table. Blueprints. We're building loudspeakers that can't be jammed. Sir, there's no such. Analog, he said, grinning. Paper cones the size of cars. Vinyl presses. Hand-cranked projectors. We make a noise that isn't signal. We make a crowd remember in the same breath. In classrooms, teachers rewrote syllabi. Today's lesson, the ugly. The necessary. The names of men who signed bad orders and the names of clerks who refused to stamp them. In kitchens, aunties dragged out boxes. In mosques and churches and temples, old people stood and told the kind of truth that makes the air feel heavier, like the room has agreed to carry something with you. The entropy shield wavered and held. ComNet motes tried to harmonize with each other and found themselves a little drunk. The countdown ticked to 6 hours. In orbit, Cyril recalibrated models. The humans were not meeting force with force. They were filthying the elegant interface between intention and effect. It was offensive. It was also, in some narrow, disobedient part of Cyril's mind, admirable. Proceed to ground, the elder adjudicators said. Deploy custodians. Their refusal must be cured at the roots. Serial closed inner eyelids no human would ever see and obeyed. They called themselves custodians, and in another life they would have been librarians too. They descended in spires of pearly fog onto Paris and Kyoto and Salvador, clean boots leaving no prints. Their clinics unfolded without hinges. Their signage glowed with the calm blues of waiting rooms where no one screams. People approached in twos and threes, curious and afraid and tired of being asked to choose between two wrongs. Menon went to the Paris clinic herself. She walked through the first chamber where plants beaded still water, through the second where light turned your breath into a lullaby, through the third where a technician's skin like glass, manner like a nurse raised a hand in apology. "We don't take memories," they said. "We organize them so they can't harm you. You file them where we can't reach them," Menon said. "And then you lock the cabinet." The technician's face didn't change. "We love you enough to save you. Love that rewires is not love." Commander Yusuf's team didn't kick the doors. They arrived with vans and paper. They set up analog loudspeakers in the square. They handed out leaflets whose text was plain and unsigned and impossible to argue with without admitting you were arguing against names. A girl no older than 12 took the mic. She read 3 lines about a bridge and a cousin and a night locked in a school gym with 1,000 strangers. Her hands shook. Her voice didn't. The custodian's harmonic field faltered. ComNet relies on predictable affect arcs, the human crowd-produced weather. The leaflets were stupid things, black ink on cheap stock, but each page carried a story angle the algorithms hadn't mapped. Paper jammed the machine. Yusuf's second team, working off a rumor, raided a custodial transport in Salvador. No guns. Wrenches. Crowbars. They cracked open a crate and found a module the size of a suitcase, crystal lattice pulsing like a patient's pulse. A portable erasure anchor. They lifted it carefully and carried it, very gently, to a truck whose bed was lined with rubber mats like a farmer's pickup. Analog stole dignity from imperial gadgets. It was petty and deeply satisfying. At dusk in Kyoto, someone tripped. A Lysander custodian, elegant, unreadable, spilled into the arms of a human nurse who caught them like a reflex. The custodian's visor cracked. Their eyes were not eyes, they were facets, millions of tiny mirrors. "We're not enemies," the nurse said in Japanese. "We're neighbors with different thresholds." The custodian, young, maybe, trembled. "We had a war," they whispered. The translator pin rendered it in soft machine voice English for the circle that had gathered. "Long ago. We erased it so our children would never learn its shape. We celebrated the forgetting. We did not notice what else we erased." "What else?" asked Menon, though she already knew. "The bridge between pain and warning," said the custodian. "We kept stepping where the ground once hurt because we no longer remembered why it hurt." The circle was very quiet. Even the analog speakers hushed. "Then stop," said a teenager with a shaved head and a backpack full of flyers. "Stop doing it to us." Overhead, the ComNet thickened like breath in winter. The countdown ticked under an hour. The clinics, stymied in some places, thrived in others. People are people. Some wanted sleep. Some wanted their father's story to stop waking them at 3 a.m. Some wanted relief and believed relief is always removed by a clean hand. Men watched a line form and fought the urge to judge. Consent mattered. If you build a world where adults can choose to forget their scars, you also build a world where institutions can choose to forget the causes. The choice was individual. The risk was systemic. Ethics has always been two rooms you must hold at once. She called Yusuf. We're not winning. We're just delaying the thing that will feel like mercy. Then we don't win, he said. We change the test. He sent coordinates. A courtyard on Lys itself. A plaza of living glass under a sky that smelled like clean rain. Teleport window, he said. 2 minutes long. You wanted to show them a museum? Let's make it hard to miss. Menon looked at the pallets of steel plates sweating heat, at the ceramic tablets cooling, at the copper faces of the unnamed. Pack the proof, she told her crew. We're going visiting. The teleport window opened like a door the size of a city block. The physics said this was expensive. The ethics said this was priceless. The archives loading docks belched forklifts into a hole in the air, and for 2 minutes, humanity did the rudest, bravest thing it had managed in a century. It set up a pop-up museum in the heart of a civilization that had outlawed ghosts. The plaza on Lys was designed for serenity. Water ran in glass channels. Birds that were not birds sang tones engineered to bleed adrenaline. People walked slowly in perfect shoes. Then pallets of steel arrived, and with them noise and sweat and the odorous democracy of crates. Menon climbed a borrowed ladder and hung the first plate herself. It was etched with a ledger, columns of names and rations and a red stamp that made your mouth dry. The caption didn't editorialize. It told you where the minister lived after the trial and how his grandson taught math in a public school for 30 years. Consequence is not always a scaffold. Sometimes it's a syllabus. Lysandra officials descended in a trellis of polite alarms. You cannot deploy unauthorized structures in a cleansed zone, a silver-clad marshal said, voice modulated to neutralize confrontation. It's not a structure, Menon said. It's a mirror. You can walk away. Lysandra citizens didn't. They queued. They touched the plates like they were warm. There is a hunger memory cannot forget to have. The room there is always a room, even when it's a plaza filled with the sound you hear only when strangers have decided to be a public. A child T-soul, crystalline shoulders still soft with youth read a caption aloud and frowned. Why do your heroes make mistakes? He asked. Because we didn't erase the parts where they did, Menon said. Cyril arrived, light muted to the color of storm glass. The models had not predicted this, a nonviolent incursion whose weapon was context. The ComNet's convergence curve flattened as mirrors met mirrors and refused to average out. The Plaza Serenity algorithms flagged and failed. You cannot cohere a crowd that has found its friction. Remove it, a counselor hissed to Cyril. Dissolve the plates. Dissolve a museum on live feed, Cyril said, and heard the sentence collapse under its own hypocrisy. Yet this was the law. The law had saved countless lives. The law would, if they were honest, destroy something fragile here and now. Allow me to speak first. Cyril faced the crowd, the cameras, the steel. We engineered peace to protect our young, they said. We curated memory to protect ourselves from ourselves. We called it stewardship. Perhaps it was fear. Menon felt the moment tilt. This was either breakthrough or trap. Her throat was dry as chalk. She nodded anyway. We're not asking you to love our pain, she said. We're asking you to let us keep the warnings that pain paid for. On Earth the clinics paused. People looked up from softly lit waiting rooms and watched a plaza of glass host a museum of steel. In orbit, the ComNet hesitated. The entropy shield breathed ragged but steady. T-Sol raised a facet hand. What is the exhibit about forgiveness? Menon led him to a plate etched with a circle of women sitting in plastic chairs under a baobab. This one. Not absolution. Accountability that doesn't make a meal of vengeance. She pointed to the line where a perpetrator had named the dead and where a mother had said, I will see you carry water for our village, and I will call that justice. The plate weighed 12 kilos. The moment weighed more. Cyril reached toward the steel, stopped, and then slowly touched it. The coolness climbed through crystal into nerve. Memory someone else's shivered their lattice. For a second, the great hall, the clean skies, the quiet decades felt like a room locked from the inside. You will break us, murmured a counselor. No, Cyril said, voice low. They will bend us back towards something we cannot name because we deleted the word. Over the plaza, a notification fell like snow, emergency motion suspend ComNet deployment pending public hearing. The elder adjudicators had not issued it. The people had demanded it, and the law had a clause for demands that rise like songs. In Paris, a clinic's queue dissolved into a conversation. In Salvador, the stolen erasure anchor sat on a table at a community center while grandmothers debated the ethics of plugging it into a blender to make smoothies, a joke so human it felt like armor. In Kyoto, the young custodian who had trembled asked the nurse for a story that could hurt safely and received one, which is how safety is made. Menon exhaled. The museum would be torn down by mourning or made permanent by courage. Either way, the test had changed. The countdown had stopped. The sky didn't apologize. It just went on being sky. She looked at Cyril. We brought our ugliness, she said. Will you bring yours? Cyril watched T-Sol trace the letters on the steel with a child's careful finger. I don't know where ours are, they said. It sounded like confession and like a map. Then we'll help you look, Menon said. If you let us keep ours while we do. Cyril didn't smile, their face wasn't built for it. But something in the angles softened, like light through rain. Begin, they said. By noon the plaza on Lis sounded like a train station at the end of a war, not panic purpose. Families queued under the water channels. Elders touched steel. Children asked the kind of questions adults avoid because the answers make you move your furniture. The first countermeasure was elegant and doomed. The marshals dimmed the sun arrays a fraction and flooded the square with harmonic birdsong. Serenity algorithms surged, met a wall of human noise, paper rustle, laughter, whispered names, and slid down it like rain off waxed canvas. You can't harmonize a crowd that has decided to disagree together. The second countermeasure had teeth. Hardliners pushed a notice through the channels with bureaucratic speed. Unlicensed memetic deployment in a protected zone. Foreign agents classified as memory terrorists. The word snapped through feeds like a wire. In clinics on Earth, waiting room playlists sharpened. Doors that had been soft now hissed. T-Soul, small and bright as a bottle marble, stood on a bench and raised his hand. If stories are dangerous, why do your stories never hurt? He asked the marshal nearest him. We cure it, said the marshal. We keep the shape, not the jagged. Jagged is how you know it's real, T-Soul said, and 36 people who had never met him cheered softly, as if you could applaud a nerve. Cyril watched the plaza from the rim, models scrolling like rain behind their eyes. The Great Hall had sent a sealed directive, deploy lattice wave. Short pulse. No pain. Remove hot nodes museums, courts, the noisy. They pictured the wave sliding down over a child's face and found, to their confusion, that the image did not sit. Harmony is not universal if it has to be forced through someone else's throat. They walked to Menon, who was showing a teenager how to hold a ceramic tablet without dropping it. Bring these down, Cyril said. We will convene a hearing in a week. Without removal, the city destabilizes. A week, Menon said, is 7 nights of clinics running overtime. People are asking for relief, Cyril said, voice low. You're making them ashamed of wanting it. I'm making the price visible, she said. I am not your conscience. I am what your conscience reads before it signs anything. Above them, slender drones unfurled banners of calm that rippled like ponds. Earth Culture Guard vans rolled into the plaza service alleys and disgorged things that looked like stage props, paper megaphones 6 meters long, vinyl players, hand-cranked mimeographs. The volunteers wore dust and smiles that belonged to people who'd discovered a trick and were about to use it. The first shot of the lattice wave glittered on the horizon, pearl faint, almost pretty. On Earth, clinic lines doubled in length. On LIS, feeds announced a temporary hygiene pulse. Hardliners breathed out. This would be the end of the messy day. Menon climbed the ladder again. She unfurled a banner over the steel plates, its weight measured in names. The fabric flashed 1,000 typefaces, all the fonts of grief, and wasn't that beautiful and terrible to behold? Yusuf's voice crackled in her earpiece, you still opposed to violent options? Yes. Good, he said. Because I brought a band. He had not brought a band. He had brought physics on a drum line, 100 volunteers with gongs and handbells and cheap box fans, a portable boiler rig, and pallets of salt and iron, what the sea gives when it loves a planet enough to keep it honest. They'd studied the ComNet's coupling layer and found it delicate as silk in a sandstorm. The lattice wave crested. Cyril looked at the law. The law looked back. They lifted their hand anyway. Don't, T-Soul said softly, not pleading. A statement. Like gravity. Cyril closed their hand and spoke into the martial net. Hold fire. On whose authority? The chief marshal demanded. On mine, Cyril said, and knew that whichever way this went, they had just stepped into a room with no doors. The crowd took a breath as one organism. The plaza fountains hissed. Yusuf's rig rattled. Rust-colored confetti fine as talc, safe as the taste of a coin on your tongue, rose into the air on heat and stubbornness. The wave arrived and found a sky that wasn't cooperating. The lattice wave touched the plaza like gauze. In clean conditions, ComNet synchronized with moisture, slipped alongside breath, and sang to neurons the lullaby that filed edges down. Today the air was full of grit that did not care for lullabies. Heat plumes from the boilers punched microthermals into the square. Fans set up in alleys made little cyclones with cheap blades that wobbled just enough to refuse pattern. Volunteers rang bells in polyrhythms that made the Serenity algorithms fail to lock on. The fountains threw iron-salted mist, and the mist clung to nano-cloud interfaces like burrs to velvet. You could chart the failure in the data coupling coefficients taking on the soft, ragged shapes of turbulence, but the plaza did not need charts. It had lungs and a feeling. A woman in line at a clinic on Earth tilted her head, listening to the hum in the sky, and stepped back. Not today, she told the technician, and the technician, who had a brother and a childhood and a conscience, nodded and closed the door for an hour because rules are less convincing when you can hear a song outside them. On Liss, the first cusp of the wave broke and slid. People flinched. There was a moment of blur, like stepping from sun to shade and forgetting why you came outside. Then the air steadied. The museum's captions returned to focus. A boy said the last word of a difficult sentence out loud and grinned as if he'd just found a coin. Cyril's comms filled with clipped panic. Unacceptable interference, hazard to public comm, authority compromised. They should have answered with protocol. Instead they answered with truth. Public comm is not the same as public health, they said. We have mistaken one for the other and built a law around the mistake. The chief marshal cut the channel with an oath older than ComNet. Hardliners authorized a second pulse, amplified, narrowed, ruthless. This one would target hot nodes of mnemonic contagion. The steel plates. The analog horns. The people. Yusuf looked at Minan. We can escalate. I can throw kinetic at their projectors, non-lethal, ugly, effective. No, she said. If we teach them that the only counter to an edit is an impact, they will not learn the right lesson. So what lesson? We anchor, she said. Stories are harder to dissolve when they're being spoken. She turned to the crowd. 12 minutes, she shouted. 12 topics. 1 minute each. You're the syllabus. It began as disorder and became a choir. A nurse named the day she refused to falsify a chart. A judge named the time he recused himself because his cousin sat at the defense table. A grandmother named the wrong she did. A man named the apology he owes and hasn't yet delivered. A teacher named the safety drill they changed after they read the names of children for whom the old drill was too late. It wasn't confessional theater. It was civic weather. The wave, tuned for tidy arcs, tried to match and took on water. Fans rattled. Bells clanged. The fountains hissed a rusty rain into the sweet geometry of Liss. ComNet's second pulse arrived with perfect math and found itself chewing grit. Across the plaza, a custodian stepped into the flow as if into a river at spring melt. It was the young one from Kyoto, visor repaired, hands empty. Cyril, they said over the secure channel. If we keep pushing, we will buy quiet at the price of a riot. Law, began the chief marshal. Law built to prevent riots, the custodian said carefully, should not cause them. Cyril saw three futures stack in their mind. In one, the plaza fell asleep on command and woke up more docile and less human. In another, the museum stood and so did rage, and the city broke its own windows. In the third, they put down the tool that had saved them and let the room get loud, because sometimes the only way to know if your piece is alive is to hear it breathe. They reopened the public channel. Suspend deployment. Convene emergency hearing. 30 minutes. Plaza floor. You cede process to a mob, the elder adjudicator asked from a world away. I recognize a legislature, Cyril said. It has no chairs, but it has a quorum. Yusuf lowered his hand. The band kept playing anyway, because even victories need backbeat. People cried and did not apologize. The wave faded to a sheen like humidity after rain. Menon checked the tablets with the touch of a conservator and the care of a mourner. No pitting, she murmured to no one in particular. No loss. A child in the front row, T-Soul, face set in a 10-year-old's version of Resolve, took the mic. I want to know are ugly, he said. Please. Cyril, who had spent a career deleting the very ask now vibrating the air, realized they knew where the archives were buried because they had helped shovel. That fact hurt in a clean way. Then we will dig, Cyril said. Together. They stripped the dais down to floor. No platforms. No velvet ropes. The hearing's rules fit on a sheet of recycled paper, and for once the paper looked like it could carry the weight. The syllabus, Menon announced, voice amplified by a ridiculous paper horn that made engineers wince and citizens grin. 12 minutes. 12 lessons. Each a practice, not a platitude. 1. Name harm. A Lysandra engineer stepped forward, fingers trembling like wind chimes. We built a classifier that flagged dangerous myth shapes, she said. We were proud. We made it a god. She named the first student it misfiled and where that student spent the next year, calm and small. 2. Institutional no. A human police chief set a badge on the floor. This is what I can do, she said, fingertip on the metal. This is what I should not. I want to keep both sentences in the same mouth. 3. Witness maintenance. A janitor from the Great Hall produced a drive wrapped in oilcloth, a deleted docket, a stub where a trial had been, wiped down to faintness but not gone. I kept it, he said simply. Because someday a child would ask. 4. Consequences without hunger. The steel plate with the baobab circle glinted. A Lysandra mother read the caption aloud and did not shatter. The plaza listened to a word rarely spoken in cities that never admit storms, enough. 5 through 8 braided human moments and Lysandra admissions until the air hummed with the humility of being wrong in public and choosing to keep breathing. People looked at each other as if they had been neighbors for a long time without noticing. 9. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Cyril took the mic. No simulation prepared for that. They lifted a shard of glass clear, dangerous, and held it up where everyone could see. We had a civil war, they said. The plaza's sound collapsed inward, small and intense. We made it smooth. We told ourselves our children did not need to carry the weight. We raised a generation that never learned where the brittle places were. Then we built a society that breaks in the same places softly, forever. They set the shard on a steel plate as if returning a stolen tool to the bench. We will restore the archives, they said. We will label them with warnings, not locks. We will teach. We will allow opt-out at the individual level, they added, glancing at Min-On, and forbid erasure by policy. 10. Choose repair over decor. A contractor described how his firm once paved over a memorial because it didn't match a designer's vision. He paid from his own pocket to tear the paving up and replant names. 11. Permission to be changed by evidence. The chief marshal stepped forward, took off his helmet, and said, "I argued to crush this. I was wrong. I still don't like the noise. I will learn to sleep in a louder city." 12. Remember to remember. T. Sol read from a card he had written in a child's practical print, "Make a holiday where we clean the stories, not our history. Bring brooms and water. Read aloud. Fix broken plagues. No fireworks." The plaza laughed, then clapped, then didn't stop for a while. Lyssa's charter had a clause no one had used in centuries because society had forgotten where it put its bravery, a plebiscite trigger for emergency ethical questions. A quorum was a body in a place saying "we are here." The plaza counted as the place. The bodies were more than enough. The council's feed spilled the vote across 10 continents of glass. The question was short. Shall the right to remember be recognized as fundamental and ComNet prohibited from non-consensual deployment? People touched their palms to a sensor. Crystals brightened. Steel held very still. After 5 minutes the result flashed like a heartbeat. Affirmed. Not unanimous. A sizable minority chose calm like sleep, and no one booed them. Relief should be allowed to exist. It just can't be compulsory. Cyril's shoulders, if you could call them that, lowered. Policy must catch up, they said. It will be ugly. Policy is better when it has to heal. Min-On felt the delayed tremor in her hands, the bill coming due after bravery spends too much. She put her palms on a plate to steady herself. The steel was warm from other hands. She apologized to no one for needing that. Yusuf sat down on a crate like a man coming off a long march and looked up at the sky that had failed to do its job today. Good, he told it. You're allowed to fail. Treaties like to look inevitable in hindsight. They are not. They cost sleep and friends and 1,000 small concessions that feel like paper cuts. The accord for the integrity of memory took 16 weeks and 500,000 arguments. It banned forced deployment of ComNet and its cousins. It required content warnings like handrails, not like padlocks. It created an independent office of witness with co-chairs from species that had once called each other names on public channels. Min-On did not want the title they gave her, Commissioner for the Preservation of Harmful Truths, because it sounded like a paradox and a dare. She took it anyway, on the condition that her first act would be to convene a children's board. They met monthly, cross-species, sticky with juice and crumbs, and added a rule no adult had thought to write: every museum must have a room where you can go be quiet and not be fixed, and a door you can leave by any time. Consent in architecture. Ethics in floor plans. Yusuf returned to Earth and declined 3 promotions. He took a smaller job, the one that pays in washing your hands in a janitor's sink at midnight, building noise kits for cities that would never see a Lysandra barge but might someday face a different kind of clean. The kits contained bells, fans, a boiler plan, and a syllabus with blank lines for local stories. He packed each with a postcard: when the world tells you to hush, make weather. Cyril stood in a room that had not existed a month before, the archives of the forgotten war, which were now neither forgotten nor war alone but the years before and after, the mistakes that led to it, the bureaucracies that fattened on its shadow. Citizens came with flowers and questions. They left with questions and fewer flowers. A good archive should make you water something. T. Sol wrote a school book with an index that told the truth about where the good parts came from and where the bad parts hid. He made deliberate mistakes and footnoted them: leave as is, show students that even small errors can travel far if you let them ride alone. There were costs. Some who chose ComNet privately carried lighter burdens and heavier silences. Policy respected their choice and trained neighbors to. Some cities pushed back and had to be pushed in return, which is how federations remember they are alive. The pop-up museum on List did not stay a pop-up. It sprouted foundations like a plant discovering it had always wanted to be a tree. Human steel sat beside Lysandra glass, a marriage counselors would call honest. Next to the baobab circle plate, curators installed something quiet, a clear box containing a single translator pin fallen on a podium on Earth, the sound of its clatter captured and looped, a reminder that sometimes the first tool you put down is the one that let you sound smooth. At the dedication, no one cut a ribbon. They opened a door. Children of both species led adults through, pointing at mistakes and victories with equal delight. Outside, vendors sold bread and salt. Inside, a plaque near the exit carried a sentence shaped like a key. Civilization is not the absence of edges. It is the decision to keep them where we can see them, and to teach our hands how to hold without cutting. Menon stood with Cyril at the threshold, where light behaved like it had choices. You know, she said, we only won because we refused to win the way we knew how. Cyril, whose face still liked rules and had learned to like exceptions, tilted toward her. You brought rust to a glass world, they said. You made it beautiful. She shook her head. We made it honest. Beautiful is your department. Yusuf, passing with a box of bells and a grin, saluted. Don't get used to peace being tidy, he said. It gets bored and wanders off if you make it too perfect. T. Sol darted by, scuffed and late for class and radiant with purpose. He stopped, turned back, and tugged Cyril's elbow. They're teaching the ugly today, he said. I got the part where the hero panics and runs and comes back anyway. Good casting, Cyril said, and followed him in. Outside, the sky considered weather and chose a light rain. People lifted their faces to it because it tasted a little like salt and iron, the flavor of a story you keep because it keeps you. Somewhere far, a clinic light flipped from open to by appointment only. Somewhere near, a woman told a child the kind of truth that makes rooms sturdier. We did not become better than we were. We became more visible to ourselves. We learned that what looks like weakness refusing anesthesia can be a bridge. We learned that an archive is a promise, not to worship pain, but to work so that pain, when it comes, cannot say it wasn't warned. We came to the stars with railguns and stubbornness. We learned teleporters and turbulence. We built a museum in the middle of a law and invited the law inside. That is not primitive or advanced. That is a species remembering itself in public, and inviting its neighbors to watch. The sky did not bless it. The sky is weather. We are the ones who say what it means.